likelihood of some sort of dramatic overthrow of the regime seems to me to be very slight, with one possible exception. If the regime loses the war dramatically, then I suspect the skids are under him. But we're still quite a long way away from that, I think.
Evgenia, I'll start with you now. Your husband is also an outspoken critic of Vladimir Putin. Many see him as a real Russian patriot. He's survived poisoning a number of times, but he is sitting behind bars now following his opposition to the war in Ukraine. This must be very frightening for you, hearing about the news of Navalny, because your husband is in a not dissimilar position. What was it like for you when you heard the news yesterday?
It is indeed very frightening, and not just for me, but for every single family of every single political prisoner in the Russian Federation, because we know what kind of methods are being used by the authorities with regard to those who oppose the official narrative and who are courageous enough to stand tall and say no to the war and no to repression. And these methods include torture, punitive psychiatry, sexual harassment, and Stalin-era prison terms going up to 10, 15, 25 years for standing up to the regime. There is a number of Russian political prisoners behind bars today who are there with very serious medical conditions, which puts their lives in danger every single day. So I'm not alone in my fears for my husband's life. And every single person who opposes Vladimir Putin today runs the same risks.
And how is your husband doing? Have you been able to see him? Do you know what his physical health is like at the moment? How long has he been in prison for?
My husband was detained in April 2022. And in April of 2023, he was sentenced to 25 years of strict regime for so-called treason, based on a few speeches that he made on different international platforms, public speeches that can be easily found online on YouTube. And in these speeches, he talked about repression in Russia, about the need for the Russian population to have access to independent information. He talked about the illegitimate character of Vladimir Putin's rule, and he talked about aggression against Ukraine and the need for the Nuremberg-style tribunal to bring all those responsible to accountability. These speeches, according to the Russian authorities, and that is from the official indictment against my husband, these speeches threatened the national security of the Russian Federation and damaged the image of the Russian Federation on the international stage. So anyone who opposes the official narrative in today's Russia is being portrayed by the regime as a criminal, a spy, a traitor, a foreign agent. This is the reality of Vladimir Putin's regime. And my husband, having survived 2 assassination attacks, of course, his health leaves a lot to be desired. He has a medical condition as a result of those poisonings, and that condition is deteriorating behind bars.
And have you been able to see him or visit him? Do you have regular contact with him?
I saw my husband for the last time before his detention in April of 2022. I talked to him for the last time last summer. In December, he was allowed a 15-minute call with the kids. We have 3 children, so 15 minutes divided by 3 means that each kid got 5 minutes to talk to their dad. And this was the first call in over half a year. Now, I was using a timer to make sure that everyone got their 5 minutes. And I could not allow any of my kids to speak for longer than 5 minutes to their father, because I could not deprive the other 2 of the possibility to do the same. And we it was just our 20th wedding anniversary a couple of days ago. And Vladimir requested a call on this day and was denied. According to the Russian authorities, the 20th wedding anniversary is not an exceptional circumstance that would allow such a call, unlike, for example, death, as they said.
Gosh, I'm so sorry. I mean, it's just unbearable to hear what you and your husband and your children are going through, but you've spoken incredibly powerfully about how difficult life is in Russia and how much the authorities bear down on dissent or protest. We are hearing reports this afternoon, Evgenia, that people, I think more than 250 people now in Russia, have been arrested and detained simply for laying flowers for Navalny, for going to want to commemorate and mourn his death. How worried are you for people in Russia who want to express how they feel about the death of Navalny? Do you think that do you think more people will come out now? And do you worry about what will happen to them?
I know that despite the atrocious repressive methods used by the regime with regard to those people who voice their opposition to what is happening, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago, people have not stopped coming out, and we hear about new detentions and new arrests every single day. People are given harsher and harsher prison sentences. The number of so-called high treason cases is on the rise because these cases can be considered by the court behind closed doors. So even lawyers very often are not allowed in, and human rights defenders only not even know about all the cases of so-called high treason. We know that people are deprived of the right to raise their kids, like Alexei Moskalev and Natalia Filonova, who were both arrested for speaking out against the war in Ukraine, and their kids were taken away from them. We know that punitive psychiatry is being used with regard to people, like in the case of journalist Maria Ponomarenko. We know that extreme violence and sexual violence is being used. And despite all that, people continue looking for ways to express their outrage at what is happening. And the fact that people are getting detained for just laying flowers sees how much the regime is afraid of any dissenting voice in society, and how much the reality, the warped image of reality created by Vladimir Putin, in which the entire Russian population stands behind him in the war, how much the reality is different from that image that he is trying to create. Because in order to create that image, he is using increasingly repressive methods against anyone voicing their opposition.
Okay. Well, let's bring in Sir Tony Brenton, who's a former British ambassador to Russia. Sir Tony, thanks very much for joining us. I mean, just listening to the very powerful testimony there from Evgenia, what do you think this means for any future opposition for President Putin in the future? It seems like he's been utterly ruthless with his critics and opponents. We have the murder of Navalny. We had Prigozhin, who died recently. There are many, many others. Is there any meaningful opposition against Putin now in Russia?
Well, can I say first my heartfelt sympathies to Evgenia and to Vladimir, whom I think I met some time ago. It's a terrible situation she's in, and I very much hope that he comes through it in a way that unfortunately Alexei Navalny did not. On the state of the opposition in Russia, Evgeny is quite right. There's a steady stream of demonstrations, is overstating it, but signs of opposition to the existing regime. It was quite interesting that a potential opponent to Putin in the presidential campaign arrived, a man called Nijizdov, emerged a few weeks ago, trying to stand on an anti-war ticket. And before he was excluded for technical reasons, large numbers of people were queuing up to give their signatures in support of him. So there's a lot of people out there who know that what is going on is wrong and who are prepared to some extent to put their heads above the parapet. Yesterday, one of the moving consequences of Alexei Navalny's death was the appearance of a lot of people there's a small square beside the FSB headquarters in the center of Moscow, where there is a stone dedicated to the victims of political repression, and a steady stream of people were coming along there and laying flowers. Today, what has happened is the police have come in, have driven those people away, and have cleared the flowers, with apparently a lot of arrests. So there is an underlying tremor of opposition to what's going on. But that said, unfortunately, the wider signs are that the Russian people acquiesce in, to some extent, are willing to support what is going on. There are people of a country which is at war, and the instinct of Russia, when it's at war, the instinct of the people of Russia is to back their government. Putin still enjoys something like 60% support from the ordinary Russians. So the likelihood of some sort of dramatic overthrow of the regime seems to me to be very slight, with one possible exception. If the regime loses the war dramatically, then I suspect the skids are under him. But we're still quite a long way away from that, I think.
Okay, and just a final question to you briefly, Sir Tony. We've heard David Cameron and others saying Russia must be made to pay, there must be consequences. I mean, Putin has been sanctioned in so many ways after the war in Ukraine. What else can be done from Western countries in terms of consequences?
Well, as you say, yes, we're talking about sanctions. I'm sure we're looking very hard for them. But the fact is that in the course of the war, and quite rightly, we've imposed a huge mass of sanctions on Russia already, and there's rather limited scope to do anything further. There are investigations of war crimes trials and all that going on, which may eventuate, if indeed Putin loses the war badly enough. I suspect they will find a few jailers, a few policemen connected with the Navalny case, whom they will sanction. Over and above that, I really find it quite hard to see what they might be able to do.